When growth stalls, most leaders reach for surface fixes like new campaigns, a sharper sales deck, even new hires. But the real issues are often deeper, such as misaligned systems, broken handoffs, or unreliable data. That's why we built the Growth Readiness Score. In just 5 minutes, you'll get a clear score across 4 critical areas of your revenue operations and see how you stack up against your peers with benchmark data. Tap the link in the show notes to get started. It's quick, insightful, and often reveals issues leaders don't expect.
Eventually, they lift their head up and they realize like, oh gosh, I've got a business that is full of context switching. What I mean by that is they're working with so many different types of clients. And that what could be like today, we're working on, in the context of at least agencies, we're working on an SEO strategy for a dentist today. Tomorrow, we're building an e-commerce website for a furniture store down the road. And then maybe the next day after that, we're doing an ABM strategy or a CRM implementation strategy for a manufacturing firm. Right. And so there's all these different things. You have no way of really creating true process. You have a lot of operational inefficiency because every client is slightly different than the last.
You're listening to RevOps Champions, a podcast created for B2B leaders to help you align your people, streamline your processes, trust your data, and leverage technology in order to grow your business. Corey Quinn, thanks so much for being with me today on the RevOps Champions podcast.
Brendan, I am super excited to be here.
I think I mentioned this to you before. One of the reasons I do this podcast is because it's a selfish reason. I believe that one of the best ways to learn is to teach. And by interviewing really smart people like you who are experts in their space, I'm learning while I'm having a conversation with you. And of course, I hope that the folks listening are going to be learning from the conversation that we're having. Ultimately, you are a marketing expert. I mean, you understand marketing than most people that walk this planet. But even you, knowing that you had to specialize, which is, I guess, kind of ironic because one of the things that you're known for and that you've trademarked is deep specialization. And you have a methodology around deep specialization. A lot of our clients are professional services businesses who I know you have a lot of experience working with. I guess the most famous sort of statistic that people know about you, but people listening might not be aware of, is the success that you had at Scorpion. So scaling a professional services firm, essentially, what a lot of professional services firms would consider a good revenue amount around 20 million, but up to 150 million and north of that, which I think is, again, anyone who's been part of that kind of journey knows some things that I think that they could share with folks who haven't yet achieved that.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I also want to make sure that I mention, and I'm sure we'll touch on this throughout, you're also the author of Anyone, Not Everyone, which, of course, is all about one of your core passions around specialization and knowing when to say no. So with that background, tell us quickly, Corey, how did you get from where you were before joining Scorpion to where you are now?
Yeah. I have about 30 years-ish in professional experience. About 10 years into my professional career, I was an entrepreneur and then finance. I decided to go back and get my MBA from USC here in Los Angeles. And when I graduated, all of my classmates were going into commercial real estate. That was the cool place to go. But I decided to go back into the internet. My first startup was in the internet space. And so I got a job at a digital agency called The Search Agency. And my job was as a business development manager. And what that effectively meant was I was a salesperson.
Right.
And my job was to sell high-end PPC and SEO services to large retail brands. And I was able to close deals with Lululemon, Hyundai, Remax, the Men's Warehouse, and others. And it turns out that I absolutely loved marketing and I loved the sales process. I was the number one sales guy on the team for 19 consecutive quarters and then was elevated into sales management. And then most recently, I was recruited by Scorpion to come over and help out this amazing little agency that, as you mentioned, when I joined there was $20 million. By many people's definition, that's a successful company. However, it was run by a very ambitious founder and CEO who felt like we had a really wonderful product and we had great clients and we made an amazing impact on our clients. And he was driven to go and help so many more businesses. And so I got the opportunity to come in, and at a time when the business was mostly built up to that point by this founder who basically pretty much hired his best friends and his neighbors and colleagues and people from the neighborhood type of thing. And they were very successful getting it to the $20 million mark, but they were struggling to get beyond that. And so I had this amazing opportunity to come into this company that had such a wonderful culture, great product, amazing client retention rate of 93%, which is really hard to get for any agency or any professional services firm, much less one that targets attorneys and lawyers, which of course are other professional services. And so I stepped into this role. And as you mentioned, I'm happy to talk about the details, but we were able to scale it up from that 20 million to the 150 million, actually north of that figure. And learned a lot along the way. I was not as gray when I started there. There was a lot of highs, a lot of lows, but we did have some amazing impact in the business along the way.
Yeah. Let's unpack that a little bit. So what do you credit the scaling in your time from, let's say, 20 million to 150 million in annual revenue? Like, what do you attribute that success and that growth and scalability to?
So I think something that I inherited in that role as a chief marketing officer at Scorpion, I inherited a company that had already mostly specialized. Like there was not like a pure specialization. Again, that was in attorneys, specifically personal injury attorneys. And we would do things like build websites and do local SEO and PPC. And the benefit of that was that everyone who worked at Scorpion understood the business of running a law firm at a deep level. And we could talk to it at a very deep level because we had 1,000 clients who all did that every day. And so as a result of that, we were in many cases able to help coach our attorney clients on what to expect in the next phases of growth, what the around the corner looks like for them, because we had worked with some of the best law firms. So I had inherited that wonderful sort of the benefits of that specialization. The challenge was, how do we scale that? And so that was sort of phase one, was scaling. I could talk about what we did. And then phase two was taking what we did in legal and then going to a new vertical market. And we did that about 3 times. So we went to a total of 5 vertical markets, allowing us to get to that 150. So I'd be happy to talk about how we scaled the legal vertical and then as well as how we went to the next vertical markets.
Again, asking for a friend, I'm personally very curious about this because we, like so many other firms, and let's just stick to professional services firms for now, struggle with choosing a vertical or a niche or some form of specialization, right? So with your help, in fact, last year, we actually narrowed ours down from 5 to 3. But we know that the Holy Grail, at least to get to that first sort of that next level of 20 or 30 million in revenue, it'll be a lot easier for everybody if we were to focus on one vertical or one area of specialization.
We all have just a very few amount of hours in the day and resources and time and money and people. And so where you apply that really matters.
So, but what I'm really curious about, though, in addition to that is, so you now added, so at Scorpion, you started with law firms, but then when you sort of found that were you sort of tapped out on law firms? So in other words, was growth scaling? I mean, it's like stalling. What caused you to then go to the second, the third, the fourth, and the fifth vertical or area?
And a very ambitious CEO.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
I almost argued. I thought many times, and I had discussions internally. I never made the argument ultimately with my boss, but why not just build the business around legal and just completely build that out? Because the benefits, of course, of having that vertical specialization is you get repetition through serving the same client over and over and over again. You build amazing processes and software, which we did that. And there was enough opportunity within the legal market for us to build a very successful, let's call it $40 or $50 million professional services firms with amazing retention, amazing client revenue and margins and all these great things. But again, the founder was not, that wasn't going to satisfy his soul. So we kind of took his direction. And while building out legal, we had dedicated resources continuing to build that. We hired new resources and effectively built a separate business or a business unit for each of the verticals that we expanded into. What that meant was different salespeople selling into it, different account managers, different subject matter experts who were dedicated to the vertical, topped by a president of that business unit that was responsible for the success, the profit and loss of that vertical as well for the agency.
I guess that's what I was hoping that you would get to, because essentially, so what I'm hearing is there's a certain critical mass that you need, and when you reach that, which is again having that leadership structure, that's when it makes sense to then duplicate that leadership structure, but you have to do that separately with a whole separate leadership to be successful in the next vertical.
And it just so turned out that, we had been, when I arrived at Scorpion, they had been in business since 2001. I joined in 2015. So they had 14 years of kind of figuring things out. And by the time I arrived, they had this specialization. And the legal vertical, over a short period of time after I arrived, became a real cash cow for us. And meaning that it produced amazing profits. And so instead of just taking those profits and letting the founder buy a bigger house or whatever, he decided to do two things. Number one, double down in the legal vertical, as well as use some of that to fund a new vertical in this way, which is that you're not squeezing more productivity out of the existing resources, but you're developing separate resources that are dedicated to this new vertical.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. I guess, and as you were chatting earlier, that the other thing that stood out to me that I wanted to make sure I asked you about was, as a percentage of growth, how much of that was net new versus expanding existing customers or clients?
I'd say 80% of it was net new, 80 to 90%.
Okay. Yeah, because I guess when you're growing at that scale, there has to be a lot of net new. Yeah.
We were closing 600 deals a quarter.
Wow. Yeah.
And so very much a sales-led organization. You hear these conversations around product-led versus a sales-led organization. Not to say we didn't have an amazing product, we did. However, we really built around a strong sort of sales culture where we had a small sales team, but built it to a 100-person sales team and a lot of infrastructure, a lot of resources, because that was the driver of our growth.
Corey, something else I wanted to come back to, because I might have spoken out of turn, because I think of you when I was sort of distilling what I think you're good at. I said you're a marketing expert because you understand the customer and you understand the sort of the product market fit, as it were. But really, I want you to explain to us the difference that you see, because you spent 19 years in sales, but ultimately your title was CMO. So how do you differentiate between marketing and sales?
It's such a great question. So I literally went from, at Scorpion, into a new role, which was the marketing seat, which was responsible for everything up to the sales conversation. And the benefit that I had in being in sales up until that point was that I knew exactly what it was like to be in the sales role. I knew how to talk to salespeople. I knew what they were looking for, and I knew how to join them and align with their interests. Whereas without that background, I may not understand how to work with the sales team. It may feel more foreign, or I may not be able to have that deep partnership. And so ultimately, my responsibility in this capacity, and it didn't come naturally to me, to be honest. I mean, yeah, sure, some of the lead gen and the inbound related strategies, that was natural to me, but things around positioning, messaging, product marketing, those type of things came over time. And we did do a lot of work around our brand and our positioning messaging. However, it was very much a sales, my education, I'll call it, in marketing was from the sales perspective and moving up through sort of things that are sort of upper funnel, more of a branding and a positioning.
Yeah, really interesting. So, but ultimately, yeah. So, I mean, I can see the value of having someone like you who had all this experience in sales and then putting you in the marketing position, which ultimately is to set up salespeople with better qualified leads, right?
And I think if I didn't have that sales background, I probably would have been fired in like 6 to 12 months because it was such a strong sales culture. And if I didn't fit in, if they didn't respect me and my background, they were very close to the CEO. Again, these are the best friends of the CEO growing up. If they didn't see that, hey, this guy knows us and actually is helping us, he's not just wasting the company's money or whatever, right? And so I think that it gave me at least a runway to prove myself with the sales team.
Yeah, really interesting. I mean, I won't go there now in too much detail, but there's been talk for the last couple of years about the CMO being one of the hardest jobs to do right now. Maybe what you've shared with us now as part of the solution is actually bringing people who have a lot of sales experience who can sit in that marketing leader seat because they understand what success looks like for salespeople and they can make that happen maybe more easily.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest lessons I learned the hard way was as we grew, my team grew. I was the first marketing person at Scorpion, by the way. Like I was the first person. I was a team of one. By the time I left in 2021, my team was 30 people. So we had a lot of resources. And the lesson that I learned the hard way was that if I didn't actually go and promote internally the things that we're doing to help the company to grow, the natural reaction to corporate marketing, which was my team, was, what are they doing? Like, what are they wasting? Like, why are they like, they have this huge team. What do they do all day? And they came back to bite us once when we did we actually built a building for the company, and there was this big groundbreaking, a big party, a big celebration. And when the CEO founder was on stage talking about how great every team was in the company, he would call people out by name. He left one department out, and that was my department. I was like, okay, I messed up. My team was upset, and it was like a moment. It's like, okay, as a marketer, the work we do is hard and it's impactful, but it's not easy to see us what we do. And so the job of marketing is not only to provide value to the clients, but also to market the things we're doing internally so people can see it and understand it.
Yeah, which it's interesting because a lot of companies that they call that department marcoms, which I always thought was such a name from the 1900s, as my kids would say.
Yeah.
But it's so true. I've come to really respect the fact that really is the role of marketing. Is it's not just marketing to prospective clients and existing clients for expansion, but it's the internal communication that you sometimes forget about. Yeah, that's a really good point.
We got eventually into when I joined, it was a 100-person company. When I left, it was 1,000 employees. And towards the end, it was a much different company, obviously. And we had to do things like employer branding. We had to figure out how to recruit A players. And so we got really heavy into what's the company story and how do we find the best candidates out there. So that's a whole other piece of it as well.
That's interesting you mentioned that because we've ended up in that situation many times ourselves, where prior to focusing on CRM implementations, when HubSpot was still really a marketing platform back until about 2018, and that's what we were focused on was marketing. And we were so successful at driving inbound leads that a couple of clients within a very short space of time approached us and said, why couldn't we do what we're doing for inbound leads for doing inbound recruiting? And we were like, actually, nothing. It's the same thing. You're just marketing a different story. And a lot of our clients ended up using their HubSpot CRM. They had one funnel for customers and one funnel for talent. It was really, really interesting.
So we actually, it's funny about HubSpot. So we adopted their CRM, the sales CRM, right when they just launched it. And at that time, we had 25 sellers. And the HubSpot sales CRM was not built for a 25-person sales team.
Not in the beginning, no, that's for sure.
Not in the beginning. It is now. It's a great CRM. But back then, we would have to bend the rules, meaning we just made it do things it wasn't really built to do, but we loved it so much. And so I'm very fond of their CRM. They built it, as I said, into a really powerful CRM. But back then, we were very early adopters in that world. It's fun.
Yeah. You've mentioned already a couple of times, learning things the hard way and highs and lows and whatever. But we've been part of that journey. We became a HubSpot partner in 2014. We were there with the very original CRM and what they then launched as the Sales Hub. And you're right, it was maybe 5 to 10 salespeople could use it successfully. And now we have clients that have 500, salespeople using it. So that is kind of cool. But let's talk a little bit about the highs and the lows and the learnings that we've had along the way. So what are some of let me preface that by saying I think everybody listening probably knows that the biggest highs typically come right after the lowest lows, right? Which is maybe a bit of a spoiler alert if for people who didn't know that. But what are some of the hard lessons or lows that you've learned that you felt really then propelled you forward after that?
It's a good question. So one lesson I learned, this is kind of applicable to larger companies. I worked at a company that was led by a CEO who has huge charisma, big energy, and really had a vision for how things go and grow. And I think early on, I also had kind of an ego, like I'll say I did, and I had ideas of ways that things that should be done. And I think one of the things that I learned was that it's not my business and it's not my money to spend. And so what I need to do to be a great sort of corporate citizen and really be a part of a team is to find ways to influence my boss, to communicate with him so that he understands what I'm trying to do. I think early on, I would have a better idea or what I thought was a better idea, and I would kind of argue or disagree or try and push my agenda. And it was an environment where he really wanted to make the ultimate decisions. And so I lost a lot of those arguments or those kind of passive aggressive arguments. And instead, I learned to figure out what really drives him. And what really drives him, which is kind of cool, is things that are big and flashy and big campaigns and something that really makes a big splash. And I'll be honest, I'm kind of an introvert. It's not exactly my thing, but he had a vision. He had a sort of way of what he wanted done. And so I took this feedback after kind of losing a couple of these small battles. And I said, okay, well, what is something that I think he would really respond to that would allow us to meet a big goal? In this context is the big goal was we were trying to break into franchise. And so these are obviously large multi-location businesses. We sold into the franchisor. And at the time, we had just like one franchise client, but there's this huge market that we really wanted to get into. And so I'm not sure if you're familiar, but there's a big annual conference called IFA. And IFA is where all the big franchise brands go every year. It's typically in Vegas. And it's like all the people that you want to sell to go to this. And so my pitch to him was I went in, I'll never forget this. I went into the boardroom. It was Rustin, the founder, Jamie, who's on the revenue team, and then the CFO. And I came in and I pitched them and said, hey, here's the market opportunity for franchise. Everyone's going to be at IFA. Here's what I suggest. We should spend $100,000 and give away a Tesla on the show floor. And I didn't know if I was going to get fired because asking my boss for a $100,000 campaign, it was actually much more than that at the end of the day. But what he said after thinking about it for like half a second, he was like, I love this. He actually swore. He says, I effing love this. And he got the vision, which was we were going to do a big giveaway. And it ended up being really, really cool. It's kind of a cool story. What we did was first off, we did a double-decker booth at IFA, which is meant to be something that's unique. It's striking. No one does this. So we wanted to make sure we stood out. Well, we also brought the car into the conference exhibit floor. And the deal is that as long as you went to the Scorpion booth and we scanned your badge, you would be entered to win this Tesla. It's like this actual Tesla you would win. Mm-hmm. And we're going to pull a name on day 3. It's a 3-day conference. And we're going to call out the name. If your name is called and you are here, then you win the Tesla. If you're not here, we're going to wait 30 seconds. Then we're going to pull another name from a hat. And so on day 3, of course, you had to be there. We had literally 1,000 people at our booth, surrounding our booth, all at the right time. And we pulled a name from a hat and everyone gasped. This woman was, her name was called. She was there. And it was a big moment. We had like the confetti cannons and music and everyone was it was a moment because although we were just giving away one car, everyone was there to experience that excitement. As a result of that, we ended up getting over the next 3 years from one franchise client to over 100 franchise brands, and it completely exploded our business.
You talked about the corporate sort of battle between yourself that has lots of ideas with an entrepreneurial leader who has even bigger ideas. And I mean, that's a struggle, I think, for a lot of people. I think about it, there's 2 different types of business. There's entrepreneurial businesses and then there's corporate businesses. They attract different types of people. And I think it's also important to know which type of person you are, are you better suited to working in an entrepreneurial business or a corporate business? Because they are very different.
We're very different. Yeah.
And I think if you, one of the things I've learned is that to work in an entrepreneurial business where you do have that sort of charismatic leader who has big ideas, and one of the reasons they're successful is because they think bigger than everybody else, is your role is to support and those bigger ideas, and then also know how to challenge them, or to your point, with the idea of the win the Tesla. I mean, you suddenly aligned with that really big idea.
Yes. You saw it immediately. Yeah, you saw it. And by the way, we ended up giving away a car the next 2 years, and then another car the year after that. So it was definitely ended up being the right thing. And I think to your point you're speaking to is I learned how to speak his language. And so that was the big aha for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Which to me, again, is just, it resonates teamwork, right? It's like, how do we work together to make something bigger and better? It's never just one person who's going to make it real.
If it wasn't for the challenge that I had in communicating with him, I never would have come up with the Tesla idea.
Yeah. So it actually pushed you to think differently in a way that would align and actually where you could actually do something really cool together. Yeah. Not only cool, but extremely successful.
Yeah, right.
Anything else you want to talk about in the highs and lows department?
Just in general, I don't know if it's a high or it's a low, but just the overall culture of the company was work hard, but also play hard. Like there was moments where we would all celebrate really big, but the expectation, again, set by the CEO, visionary CEO, was work is life. And from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep, not much vacations, not much balance. And I was all in for many years. And then at a certain point, I no longer wanted to live that lifestyle. And that's one of the reasons why I ended up leaving. I had a role there, but I decided that was not a culture that I'm going to change. It's not my company. So I get to decide whether or not I want to stay in this role or not, because I know what it is, but it doesn't really align with what I want anymore.
Right. Which I'm sure it wasn't easy, but once you'd made the decision, now looking back, I'm sure you're very happy with what you did.
Oh yeah, I'm good.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so Corey, let's talk a little bit about deep specialization. What does it really mean, and why is it an unlock for scaling and growth?
Sure. Well, I'll start by, and it's a great question, one of my favorite questions, so thank you. And I think I'll start by talking a little bit about what it's not. And there's something that it's called what I call a negative flywheel. It's the generalist trap, and that is when a business says yes to everyone. Yeah, and it is a very common, especially in professional services, it's a very common, I would almost call it stepping stone in the life cycle of a professional services firm. And it's where you have an entrepreneurial founder who goes out, wants to start a business, or maybe is in business. And as they're getting going, they're attracting clients. They're over delivering for those first clients. And as a result of that, they get referrals. And those referrals are great because then they have steady revenue. They get MRR and all these great things. However, eventually they lift their head up and they realize like, oh gosh, I've got a business that is full of context switching. What I mean by that is they're working with so many different types of clients. And that what could be like today, we're working on, in the context of at least agencies, we're working on an SEO strategy for a dentist today. Tomorrow, we're building an e-commerce website for a furniture store down the road. And then maybe the next day after that, we're doing an ABM strategy or a CRM implementation strategy for a manufacturing firm. Right. And so there's all these different things. You have no way of really creating true process. You have a lot of operational inefficiency because every client is slightly different than the last. And so you've gone down that road, you've written all the SOPs, but of course they just sit in some drawer collecting dust because they suck and they don't actually add any value. They're not helpful. And so that leads to, of course, a bunch of bottlenecks, a business full of bottlenecks. And guess who the number one bottleneck is in that company? Any guesses?
Well, I guess, it's the person who hasn't made the hard decision to be more focused. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, because the founder can typically, they're fine with the context switching. They can do that all day long, but they don't realize the team around them doesn't dig that as much as they do.
And so what happens is scope creep. The quality of the product suffers because all your teams are doing something a little bit different every single time. They don't really have a chance to get excellent. And of course, over time, that compounds and turns into where you become really treated like a commodity by the marketplace, by your clients. They feel like, well, we're paying a lot of money. We're not getting the best results. Maybe we can find something better somewhere else. Or maybe we should find a specialist, someone who really understands us. And of course, that leads to client churn. And when clients leave, guess what you have to do? You have to go chase revenue. You got a mortgage to pay. You got to get your kids through college. You got a staff. You have rent and all these things. So what do? Well, you just go out and you find more business, whatever's going to keep the dollars rolling in, and you begin to say yes to everyone. And it's just this repeating process that it's very, very common for businesses, especially professional services, to get stuck in. And it leads to bottlenecks. It leads to burnout. And honestly, in today's world with AI, it is a race to the bottom. And so the challenge is that what these professional service firms try to do to get out of this, sort of escape this, is like, how do we get more leads? How do we do more sales and marketing, right? And they think it's a revenue problem or a sales problem. And of course, the reality is that if you think about the metaphor of an iceberg, where if you are, let's call it in a boat in Alaska, in the where all the icebergs are, you can kind of look around and kind of see a bunch of icebergs floating in the ocean. But of course, we know that only 10% of the iceberg is above the waterline. The majority of it is beneath the waterline. And so when I think of that metaphor, I think of how agencies try, or professional services firms try to solve this problem with sales and marketing. That's the shallow way to approach it. What I've learned and what I've been able to do at Scorpion, as well as with many of my clients, is really look beneath the waterline. And what you find beneath the waterline, 90% of the value of the growth is two things. Number one, at the core, at the base, the most powerful thing you can do to really affect your sales and marketing is in doing what I call strategic specialization. And we could talk about how to choose that vertical, and I'm happy to do that. But ultimately, it is choosing one industry, one segment, one vertical to align your business around and become, dedicate yourself to becoming an expert in that. And then once you've chosen them, that vertical market, then the next thing you do is you position and message your agency or your professional services firm so that you can communicate succinctly that you understand that specific buyer, and you're able to communicate that you understand them with empathy. So you care about them, you know them, you understand their problems, you've solved their problems for others. And once you have the specialization and the positioning and messaging in place, that's when you can go back to the top of the iceberg. And that's when your sales and marketing become much more profound, because you have a very sharp message that speaks to a specific audience. You have the expertise to back it up. So that leads to sort of the vertical or the deep specialization flywheel. Now, this is a positive flywheel. This is the one that actually works for your benefit again, instead of against your benefit, which is you focus on a vertical. Let's call it wealth management firms. Okay. So let's say I'm an agency. And again, for the audience, think of your own situation, but let's say I wanted to focus on wealth management firms as an agency. Okay. That means that I've done the specialization. Now I've positioned myself in that area, and I'm actually able to start attracting clients in that vertical market, wealth management. And by attracting 5, 10, 15, 20 clients, you begin to build some expertise through repetition. You're working with the same types of clients. You're solving the same problem. You begin, it's like the quote from Bruce Lee, which is, I fear not the man that's practiced 1,000 kicks once. I fear the man that's practiced one kick 1,000 times. Right? It's through that repetition that you build systems and software and processes and frameworks that actually get used. They become the DNA of how you operate as a business. Of course, when you do that effectively, you build leverage in your business, because now you're no longer dependent solely on A players who are nimble and can think like you can. You're able to build more IP into your process. Mm-hmm. That, of course, results in more predictable wins for your clients, because they have a predictable experience and a repeatable experience. And when you're able to provide great value to a specific segment over and over and over again, you build your authority. You become the go-to solution. And when you're the go-to solution and you have people seeking you out, you can become more of a premium offering. You can raise your prices. And then, of course, the last step in this flywheel, which is the thing that makes it a flywheel, is that once you have the operational leverage and the authority and the margin, the increased prices, you're able to take that margin and reinvest it back into the vertical market. So that's what we did at Scorpion. So instead of just pocketing that margin that we had built, what we did is we hired more salespeople. We hired better sales trainers. We hired more people in HR. We did a lot of really great things. We bought more software for our clients. We did a lot of really great things. And probably the coolest thing is that because we had great revenue, great margin. Let me tell you one more data before I finish this. Is one piece of data is that personal injury attorneys would hire us for 5, 10, 15, 20K a month, and they would stay with us for 30 months, almost 3 years. Our next closest competitor, Generalist Agency, would hire those PI firms would hire those agencies for $2,000 a month, and they would leave after 12 months. So our revenue per client was about $300,000 north of that, whereas our competitors were only making $24,000 from the same client. And so we had all this profit. And not only did we hire more people and train them better, but we also did better sales and marketing. I gave away cars, we gave away trips, we gave away gifts. We did a whole bunch of really amazing things that our competitors, they just couldn't touch it because they didn't have those margins built into their business. And so that's what the thing that makes it a flywheel is that you reinvest into that vertical market and then around and around it goes. And so that's really the thing that we did really well at Scorpion. And that's what I advise my clients to do now.
And Corey, how much of that is covered in your book?
The book is the 5 steps to escape what I call founder-led sales. Typically smaller businesses are stuck in the generalist trap. And that means that the founder is the salesperson. Now, it may be you as a listener, it may not be you, but the principles are the same. There's 5 steps to get out of that generalist trap and to get into becoming a vertical market specialist. So it's all in there.
Okay. So that's the way for folks who are past founder-led sales. The way to think about it is more the fact that you're making it much easier for the whole team not to have to do this continuous context switching. And of course, when you add that to bigger margins and the line out the door, it sounds pretty attractive.
It's interesting. I've been getting more and more into discussions around private equity with these types of businesses, professional services firms. And there's a lot of private equity firms that are investing in professional service firms. And they're typically looking for 3 things. So looking for growth, like revenue growth. They're looking for profit margin, and they're looking for retention. The beautiful thing about specialization is that when done well in the way we're just talking about, is that you have built-in growth, you have built-in profit margin, and you have great retention compared to the alternatives in the market. And that's why more and more PE firms are looking for specialized firms versus just generalists.
Yeah. Interesting. Corey, I want to go back to something that I think is part of the struggle that those of us who haven't yet achieved specialization to the extent that I think you would prefer is there, and this is where a lot of people start because this is like marketing 101, right? It's your ICP, which I use the term interchangeably with who's your hero target.
I love that.
But I think one of the things that people like me get caught up on is when I think of the hero target, one of the questions you need to ask yourself is who are the 3 to 10 top clients that you currently have who you would love to work with for the next 25 years, right? So that
exactly.
So you can imagine, I want more of those types of clients. But almost what I'm hearing is that becomes less relevant when it's so clear what it is that you do and the value that you add. That isn't even really all that important because ultimately working with any successful business is a lot of fun.
It's interesting. I believe that it's even within the context of a vertical market, let's call it wealth advisors or attorneys or whatever that is, that there is a subset of the businesses that are your hero clients, your dream clients, those that love working with you, value your service, pay a premium, refer you to everyone they know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that exists even within a vertical context. And those are worth pursuing, kind of like the Dream 100 concept.
Right. Yeah.
That is definitely true because they're going to leverage your systems and your processes better than anyone else. And they're going to love it because they're the perfect fit. So one of the things that I teach when I work with my clients is to identify them and then proactively go into the market and to actually build relationships with them.
But I guess, so from your perspective, you feel like you can find those ideal clients in pretty much any vertical.
Yes. I think that would be a part of the criteria of choosing a vertical is, are there our ideal clients? Do they live in this vertical market?
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. At some point, I'd like to chat with you about the whole IP piece, because that's something I'm very interested in right now. But I think
Sure.
maybe at this point, it's probably not the right time to talk about that, because I think that could take us in a whole different rabbit hole. Corey, another question, like from a data perspective, that I'd love to get from you. You've talked already about various metrics, whether it's revenue or margin, or you sort of alluded to churn. LTV, is that something that you think about a lot?
Absolutely. For any business where you have a monthly retainer, like LTV is probably the most important metric that you can have, because it's kind of like an annuity. You cost a lot of money and effort to get the client. Once you have them, every month they stay with you, they send you a check for 5, 10, 15 grand. So the longer you can keep them, the longer that money comes in. So that is probably the most important metric in the company.
So you believe that too? I do, but I'm just trying to get more data points, because in the industries that we work in, like franchises, AEC, so architecture, engineering, construction, a lot of them don't think about LTV as a driving metric. And I keep trying to prove myself wrong, because I believe LTV should be the ultimate metric. And it sounds like you sing the same song.
Yeah. And so it's easy or maybe tempting for businesses to really want to drive more revenue at the front end of the business. But the old metaphor is, there's a hole in the boat. Doesn't matter how much revenue you bring in, it's just going to fall out the back of the boat. And so the best thing, philosophically speaking, ideally that a business can do is to maximize their LTV, find ways to invest so that they fix any leaking holes in the boat first before they really dive deep into a sales marketing strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Because that way they know that any new business they bring in will stay with us for the long run.
Right. And in fact, I was just looking at, you were talking about what PE firms are looking at right now at pro services businesses, which is revenue, margin, and retention. Those are all components of LTV. So if you want to figure out
That's exactly right.
how to increase lifetime value over time, it's revenue, margin, and retention, right?
That's it.
And I guess once you've figured that piece out, and you gave a perfect example, right? When you were competing with other agencies who were charging $24,000 a year compared to your $100,000 a year or whatever, that is a perfect example of which LTV do you want, 300,000 or 24,000?
Right. All day. And that relates back to your ability to grow. When you have a higher LTV relative to your competitors, that gives you a competitive advantage, because then you have more margin and more capability to really be aggressive in the market. Whereas they can't do the same things. They're dependent on the least expensive channels, whereas maybe some of the more over the top stuff around giving cars away and whatnot could potentially be a really great way for you to put your name on the map, type of thing.
Which is why I'd like to get your take on this. I believe that the second most important metric, if you believe that LTV is the first, the second might be CAC, right? So customer acquisition cost. And the way that you were talking about it, it's like, well, if you have an LTV of 300,000 versus an LTV of 24,000, who do you think is going to have access to a better CAC to acquire more customers or clients?
Exactly. If you do on a percentage basis, yeah, one company could spend, let's call it 10% of the LTV to acquire a customer. The generalist agency, in my example, can spend 2,400, whereas we can spend 30,000 for that same client.
Which is why you can give away Teslas.
That's it. See, that's the marketing secret. Just give away Teslas.
Yes, I'm not going to go there right now, but I think we get the point. Teslas and icebergs. Let's keep them separate.
Yeah.
Corey, so this was super interesting and super fun. And I know we could talk a lot more, even just more about sort of franchises and professional services in general.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we have to wrap up here. So what is one thing that we haven't yet talked about that you'd like to leave our listeners with, whether it's advice or maybe something you'd like to share?
Yeah, sure. I'd say that if this conversation that Brendan and I are having is resonating with you as a listener, I would love to encourage you to explore the benefits of specialization. You don't have to follow my model, but it is very, very powerful. And I believe in the world of AI, which is doing a lot of really great things. It's also very disruptive, but it is certainly taking the task related work that a lot of us do and making it commoditized in some respect, because it can be done really well at a very efficient basis. And that specialization puts you in a position to be able to add more profound value because you're able to go deep into your client's world in a very important way. You become more strategic, be more of that trusted advisor who has judgment, where you get paid for your judgment versus just the hands work that you do. And if any of this sounds interesting, you want to go deeper, I'd love to offer you a free copy of my book. Again, it's Anyone, Not Everyone. It's a best-selling book. We just hit 100 reviews on Amazon, average rating of 5.0.
That's awesome. Congrats.
Thank you. AnyoneNotEveryone.com. That's AnyoneNotEveryone.com. And you could get the full audiobook, the same one you buy on Amazon. You buy it, you get it for absolutely free. And you also get a digital workbook that gives you things like videos and templates and worksheets, all this really great stuff. So if this is resonating with you, I encourage you to go check it out.
Awesome. I think that is a very valuable share.
Thank you,
Corey. So thanks so much for making that available to all our listeners. And again, thanks so much for sharing all your insights and experience.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Yeah, I look forward to learning more from you here in the coming months and years.
That sounds great. We'll talk soon. Thanks so much.
Corey, thanks so much. Take care, and we'll talk again soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for listening to RevOps Champions. If today's episode gave you a new idea for scaling smarter or helped you see your team, processes, or tech in a new light, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next insight. And if it hit home, share it with a colleague. Let's grow this community for forward-thinking leaders together.